Have you ever felt like there's got to be more to reality than what we're seeing? Like, what if we're just barely scratching the surface?
Oh, absolutely. That's the kind of question that keeps us up at night, isn't it? And it's exactly the kind of territory we love to dive into here.
Right. We're all about taking these really dense, complicated topics, philosophy, ancient wisdom, even some science, and pulling out those key ideas, the stuff that really makes you go,
We're aiming to give you those aha moments without completely overwhelming you with information.
exactly. You want to learn, you want to think deeply, but you don't want to get bogged down, right?
Exactly. And this deep dive, well, it's a really fascinating journey through some pretty big ideas. We're going to be looking at where science and mysticism kind of bump into each other, and we're going to dig into how we even know anything at all.
I love that, connecting all these dots across centuries of human thought.
Exactly. We got a whole mix of ideas to explore philosophy, history, and even some pretty wild spiritual concepts.
I'm so ready. I'll be your enthusiastic guide, asking the questions that you're probably thinking right now.
And I'll be here to try and make sense of it all. Because these ancient questions, they're still relevant. They still spark something in us, even today.
Okay, let's get into it.
Huh.
So, right off the bat, our sources point to this interesting tension, but also these weird overlaps between science and what we usually call mystical thought.
It's almost like these two ways of looking at the world. They seem so different, but they've been in this intricate dance for centuries.
Okay, that makes sense. But how does that even work? They feel like total opposites.
Well, the text starts by talking about this early, almost overconfidence in science. Think about Auguste Comte, a major figure in what's called positivism. Positivism basically said that science could explain everything eventually.
Right, I've heard of that.
Comte was so sure of this that he actually said certain things would always be beyond our ability to know. Like, he said we'd never know the chemical composition of stars. He even had a phrase for it, ignorabimus, which means we shall not know.
Oh, wow, that's pretty bold.
It was. And then, not too long after, boom, spectral analysis was discovered.
Which meant?
Which meant we suddenly had a way to analyze the light from stars and actually figure out what they're made of. Comte's "we shall not know" was basically proven wrong almost immediately.
That's got to be humbling for those early scientists.
Right. It shows us how setting hard limits on what science can and can't do, it can be a bit premature. There is always more to discover.
So what we think is impossible today could be totally normal tomorrow.
Exactly. It's a reminder that we should always be a little bit humble when we think about the huge mysteries of the universe.
Okay, here's where things get really interesting. The text talks about how even some of those big names in early science, Newton, Pascal, Kepler, even Descartes, they all had these, what the text calls, mystical leanings.
Right, and it wasn't always something they talked about openly.
Yeah, I remember that famous quote attributed to Newton. Only a little knowledge takes you away from God, but much brings you back to him.
It's a really deep statement, especially coming from someone like Newton, who basically invented modern physics.
It makes you think.
It does. And the text makes a point of saying these weren't just random people dabbling in the occult. It calls them, and I'm quoting here, first-class representatives of positive science, and even says that all the truly great figures in science and history were believers in something beyond just the physical world.
That's a big claim.
It is, and it really challenges that modern idea of a strict separation between science and faith. It makes you wonder, did these mystical ideas actually contribute to their scientific discoveries?
It's a very interesting idea. That their mystical side might have given them a unique kind of inspiration.
Exactly. They were rigorous scientists, but they were also drawn to something deeper, something beyond equations and atoms.
That makes so much sense.
Right. And then the text introduces this concept of a mystical pole of positivism.
Mystical pole of positivism. That sounds a bit like a contradiction. What does that even mean?
It's like saying that even within the most strictly scientific worldview, there's still this underlying sense of wonder, this feeling that some things just can't be explained or measured.
It's like science pushing us to the edge of what we can know, and then we get a glimpse of something beyond that.
Exactly. It's like the more we learn, the more we realize how much we don't know, and that can lead to a kind of mystical awe.
Okay, I'm starting to see how these things connect.
Good. Now let's shift gears a bit. The sources move on to talk about Eastern idealism, specifically comparing it to European philosophy. There's this quote from Schlegel that really stood out to me. He says that even the most advanced forms of European idealism are like this tiny spark compared to the abundant light and power of Eastern idealism.
That's some serious praise.
Right. And the text specifically points to the Vedantic system of philosophy as being in a league of its own.
What's so special about Vedanta?
Well, for one thing, it directly connects the individual self, what the text calls seja, with the divine essence.
Okay, what is the divine essence?
It's described as flawless, perfect, immortal, unchanging, and totally one. It's like the ultimate underlying reality, the source of everything else.
Whoa, okay, that's big.
It is. And the text says that no Western philosopher, not even the most famous ones like Plato or Kant or Schopenhauer, ever reached this level of insight. It even compares Vedanta to this massive, unshakable monument.
It's like this ultimate philosophical achievement.
Right. It's seen as this really comprehensive and unified view of reality. It's not just saying there's this separate God out there somewhere. It's saying that our individual selves, at their very core, are actually connected to this divine essence.
So we're all part of this larger whole, this divine unity.
Exactly. And that's a pretty powerful and comforting idea.
It is. And what's interesting is that the text then brings in similar ideas from other traditions, like the Kabbalistic idea of ego sum qui sum, which means I am that I am, and Plato's idea of tos the sovus e, which means the truly being.
It's like all these different cultures, from ancient Hebrew mysticism to classical Greek philosophy, are all pointing to the same basic truth about the nature of existence.
Like there's this universal human intuition about reality.
Exactly. We see this recurring idea that there's some supreme, ultimate being that's the source of everything. And the text even talks about how Egyptian mystics and Greek philosophers influenced later traditions like Neoplatonism and Gnosticism, always carrying this core idea of being as the highest category of divinity. There's even a quote from Simon Magus, a Gnostic figure, who said, "God is the sum and first source of the potencies of being."
It's amazing how these ideas have traveled through history.
It is. So we've gone from the relationship between science and mysticism to these big ideas about reality and the self. And now the text gets into different levels of human knowledge and reality, introducing this concept of being in prolongation as the ultimate reality.
Being in prolongation, what does that even mean?
Imagine the ultimate source, the foundation of everything, not as static, but as constantly extending and manifesting itself in all sorts of forms. That's being in prolongation, this continuous unfolding of the supreme reality.
So it's not just an abstract concept, it's actually how reality works.
Right. And the text says this is how we should understand both divinity and the whole cosmos. Then it gets into these two key aspects called hypostases: transcendental being and transcendental consciousness.
Okay, hold on, two aspects.
Right. But they're not separate things. Consciousness is like the inner nature of being, and being is the fundamental nature of consciousness. They're two sides of the same coin.
Interesting. But what about the everyday world, the world we experience with all its separate things? Where does that fit in?
That's what the text calls the differentiated world. And it's seen as a place where consciousness is kind of diluted compared to the pure consciousness of the absolute world. It's like a spectrum of light. The absolute world is the full spectrum, and our world is like specific color or shade.
I like that analogy. So we're seeing a filtered version of reality.
Exactly. And then there's this important formula. Absolute and illusion of the environment are the opposite poles of the essence of each factor of nature.
That sounds really fundamental.
It is. What it's saying is that what we see as our solid, objective reality, our environment, might actually be an illusion.
An illusion. But it feels so real.
I know, right? But the idea is that if we're disconnected from that supreme synthesis, that ultimate unity we were talking about, then everything appears separate and real, even though it's not. It's like mistaking a wave for something separate from the ocean.
So our perception is limited.
Exactly. We're not seeing the whole picture.
But the text also says that even though we can't directly experience this absolute reality, we can understand how far removed any particular thing is from its absolute prototype. How's that possible?
That's a great question. It's saying that even though we can't see the absolute directly, we can study its reflections in the world around us. By looking at the limitations of things in our experience, we can get clues about the nature of the absolute. It's like studying the shadow of a tree to learn about the tree itself.
Oh, I see. So we can work backward from what we can see to get an idea of what's beyond our vision.
Exactly. It's like a puzzle.
Okay, next up. The sources talk a lot about intuition as a way of knowing. There's even a Schopenhauer quote: philosophy is only the conscious and deliberate return to the data of intuition.
Right, and it goes on to talk about Bergson's view of intuition as well. It then mentions Plutarch's idea of the true servant of Isis, who uses reason to analyze divine teachings. But ultimately, it's through intuition that they really understand the deeper meaning.
So it's not enough to just think logically. We also need to tap into our intuition.
Exactly, and the text makes it clear that intuition isn't just for a select few. It says it's something everyone has. In fact, it calls intuition prima inter pares, first among equals when compared to other ways of knowing.
So it's like our most important tool.
In a way, yes, but it also emphasizes that intuition is subjective. It's your own inner knowing.
So it's personal.
Very much so. Then we get the Kabbalistic perspective, which says Kabbalah itself is all about intuitive understanding. It calls it a divine science, specifically the science of God.
So it's like science, but based on intuition instead of observation.
That's a good way to put it. It's fascinating how all these different traditions, philosophy, ancient Egyptian wisdom, Kabbalah, they all point to intuition as this really powerful way of knowing.
It's like a universal truth.
It really is. Now let's talk about the cosmic passive environment. It's described as the phenomenal picture of the world as it appears to our senses.
Okay, I'm following.
Think of it like the stage where everything happens. It's the world we see, hear, smell, taste, and touch. It's where all the action takes place. And then we come across this very dense formula. Man lives in a world of realized impulses, but through the feeling of synthesis, achieves a priori knowledge of the polarly opposite beginnings, substantial agents, lying one above and the other below his intellectual world in the order of synthesis, and collectively expressing the cosmic motive difference of potentials, the external active reflection of the final reality.
Wow, that's a lot to unpack.
I know, right? But basically it's saying that our everyday experience is a world of manifested energies and actions, what it calls realized impulses. But we humans, we have this ability to synthesize, to put things together and see the bigger picture.
We like to connect the dots.
Exactly. And through that process of synthesis, we can gain this fundamental knowledge about the underlying forces that shape reality. It calls this knowledge a priori, meaning it comes before or independent of our direct experience.
So it's like we can intuit deeper truths about reality.
Exactly. And it says these forces or substantial agents exist on a deeper level than our intellect can grasp, but also on a more manifested level in the world around us. They create this dynamic interplay of potentials that drives the universe. And what we experience is just a reflection of that ultimate reality.
It's like our experience is just the tip of the iceberg.
Exactly. There's a whole lot more going on beneath the surface.
And this is where the supreme synthetic teaching, the sacred book of Thoth, comes in, right?
Right. This is a big one. It's presented as a system of doctrines that explain how the one reality unfolds and manifests itself. It's like a blueprint for understanding how everything came to be.
A blueprint for reality. That's ambitious.
It is. And it also explains how we as human beings can overcome a sense of separation and return to unity with that one reality.
So it's a guide for spiritual growth as well.
Exactly. And this one reality, this ultimate unity, is revealed through a system of 21 great arcana, which make up the second part of this book of Thoth.
21, that's a specific number. Is there a reason for that?
It seems to represent a complete cycle or system of knowledge. The text says we can only understand the first part of the book after we've grasped the knowledge contained in those 21 arcana, and then the third part of the book builds on those principles and applies them to the world around us.
So the arcana are like the keys to unlocking this whole system.
That's a great way to put it. And the text says that the path to true knowledge is unique for each person. It's revealed through what it calls the divine light of these 21 arcana.
So it's a personal journey.
Absolutely. Everyone's path is different.
Now, the sources quote Francis Bacon talking about the object of philosophy. He says, Philosophiae objectum triplex, deis natura et homo, which means the object of philosophy is threefold: God, nature, and man.
Right, and our focus in this deep dive, based on the material, is on the first two parts of that book of Thoth, the great arcana that deal with God and man. And it mentions how these arcana have a specific order and numbering. Some of them even have two designations. Like the 21st arcanum is sometimes called the 0, and what's sometimes considered the 22nd is also numbered as either the 21st or the 22nd.
Okay, that's a little confusing.
It is, but the key point is that these 22 great arcana, taking into account those double designations, form a complete enclosed system. Their number and order aren't random. They come from pure reason.
So it's like a map of consciousness or a blueprint of reality.
Exactly. It's a framework for understanding the most basic principles that govern existence.
Now, there's a part in the sources about Gnosticism, specifically Simon Magus, and how early church writers supposedly distorted Gnostic teachings. Why is that included here?
It's a reminder that it can be really hard to understand ancient wisdom traditions, especially when those in power have tried to suppress or misrepresent them. The text argues that early Christian writers twisted Gnostic ideas so much that they became almost unrecognizable.
So it's like a warning to be careful about historical bias.
Exactly. And then it talks about the discovery of a manuscript in the 19th century, the Philosophumena, which gave us a more accurate view of Gnosticism. It showed that Gnostic thought was actually pretty sophisticated, filled with what the text calls brilliant creations of philosophical genius.
So we need to be careful about whose version of history we're reading.
Absolutely. It's important to be critical and to look for primary sources whenever possible.
I agree. Okay, finally, the discussion touches on the power of the word and ancient wisdom. It brings in the Kabbalistic idea of the Ancient One, with three heads that form a single being.
Right, and this represents the source of other illuminating lights called Sephirot, which are also connected to the number 3.
So again, we see this theme of unity arising from multiplicity.
Exactly, and the text repeats those phrases, ego sum sum from the Kabbalah and sutafsi from Plato, connecting them back to the wisdom of those ancient Egyptian mystics and how this idea of being was passed down through different traditions. The point is that this idea of being as the highest and most fundamental category of divinity has been preserved throughout history.
It's like this core truth that keeps popping up in different forms.
Exactly. It suggests that there's this deep-seated human intuition about the nature of reality, one that goes beyond any specific religion or philosophy.
Wow. Well, we've covered a lot. From the connections between science and mysticism to the depths of Eastern idealism, exploring different levels of reality and the importance of intuition, all the way to this idea of the cosmic passive environment and this sacred book of Thoth with its Arcana.
And hopefully our listeners are starting to see how all these seemingly different ideas can actually be connected. It's about recognizing those recurring themes, the human desire to understand our place in the universe, and how that desire has been expressed in so many different ways throughout history.
So, as you keep exploring and learning, here's a thought to consider. Given the connections between scientific discovery and mystical insight, are there any boundaries that we're unknowingly placing on our own understanding of the universe?
And if intuition really is such a key to knowledge, how can you cultivate and trust your own inner knowing?
Those are some big questions to ponder. Thanks so much for joining us on this deep dive. If you have any sources or topics you think we should explore, let us know. We're always looking for new rabbit holes to go down.
We'll see you next time.